Oi, pessoal, boa tarde, bem-vindos a mais uma palestra do Case Startup Summit 2020. Eu sou Emília Chagas, sou CEO da Growth Hackers, cofundadora da Contentu, que hoje é Growth Hackers Workflow, e estou aqui hoje para fazer uma entrevista com uma pessoa muito especial na nossa trajetória, que é a Christine Tsai. Ela é CEO da 500 Startups, e essa entrevista vai ser em inglês, mas vocês vão ter legenda o tempo todo, tá? Da entrevista. Então, sem mais delongas, eu vou switch to English. To introduce everyone, Christine. Christine, welcome here. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. Obrigada.
Christine is the CEO and founding partner of 500 Startups. Since the firm's inception in 2010, so it's been 10 years now, she grew 500 startups to over $500 million in committed capital. Christine spent her entire professional career building and investing in Silicon Valley. From 2003 to 2010, Christine held product marketing and operating roles at Google, focusing primarily on monetization and developer products, including Google AdSense, right, Christine? Talking a little bit about your background here, what do you think these roles at Google and even your background in, I believe your bachelor is in cognitive psychology. What does your background help you, and how did it help you in your current job, becoming a VC eventually?
It's a good question in terms of at least what I studied in college. So I think, like you mentioned, I did cognitive science at UC Berkeley, and I think there was a lot of aspects to that major, which was pretty new at the time. That's very interdisciplinary. So now I think cognitive science at I think Stanford, it's called symbolic systems. But now this concept that when you're studying certain subjects, there's a lot of kind of interdisciplinary topics that are applicable. It's not just kind of one major. I think that's becoming more, maybe more mainstream. But back then, cognitive science was a major that combined computer science and AI, psychology from a cognitive perspective, neuroscience, linguistics, philosophy. All of those are kind of wrapped into how you understand the mind. So I think in some ways, maybe that connected to kind of really understanding how people use products, how founders work. Of course, back then, that was not what I had thought of. And, when I graduated from Berkeley, it was kind of right around the .com boom and bust. So kind of a different era of tech. But that plus, when my time at Google, I had the opportunity in AdSense, like you mentioned, analytics, working on developer products and APIs. A lot of the users of those products are small businesses, developers, basically startups. So I think that was a lot of my initial startup exposure in working with these developers to use our products and test it. And so that's what drew me to startups and what they were building, eventually into venture and founding 500.
That's amazing. And it's been 10 years now. Did you imagine 10 years ago that you'd get where you are right now? I mean, I think the 500 startup name, does it have to do with anything around like 500 startups being the goal of number of investments or not really?
Yeah, I think, thinking back now, because this is a very like nostalgic, reflecting, a lot of reflection in 10 years, something about that nice round number. It's been a decade. That time went by very quickly, but then it's also like, there's an expression, the days are long, but the years are short. So definitely as a founder, we starting and building a company, there's always it goes kind of like this, even though in your presentation, it goes like, up and to the right. But then, wow, 10 years went by so quickly. And, I think you were obviously part of that as one of our batch companies. So you definitely got to see that from the founder perspective. But yeah, I think thinking back to 2010, when, I left Google, about to embark on something completely new and that hadn't been built, I didn't have this in mind. I think we were just so focused on doing something very different in venture and being a very different kind of firm. But the name 500 was kind of a nod to kind of a different, there was a Dr. Seuss book called like the 500 Hats of
Mhm.
Bartholomew Covens, and it was a kind of an acknowledgement of entrepreneurs wear many hats. They do a lot of
Yeah.
things. They write code, they sell, they fundraise. So we, called it 500 startups, but we actually surpassed 500, the 500th company pretty soon. So like maybe
Yeah.
back in 2012 or 2013. So now there's some mystique around the number. Like, oh, maybe it's a new standard, like S&P 500, Fortune 500. So,
Mhm.
so now a lot of people know us as just kind of just 500.
Yeah, definitely. And now you have invested in over 2,400 startups.
Hmm.
So yeah, and you're considered last year the most active early stage investor in the world, according to
Yeah,
PitchBook. It's the
right.
number one most active VC globally in exit, number one most active global investor by VC deal count. So is that something that you consider like the main brand for 500 being so active and global at the same time?
Global is definitely a very big cornerstone for our brand, because I think that's something that from the very beginning that has been a big part of our identity and our investment thesis, to bet on companies and seeing opportunities um, outside of Silicon Valley. So we, kind of our ethos around this was being a Silicon Valley based firm, having the deep operational experience and the network, but bridging that gap between Silicon Valley and other markets, whether it's other cities in the U.S. or other metros, but also outside of the U.S., Brazil, Mexico, Japan, Middle East, Southeast Asia. And if you remember back in 2010, 2011, that was a very contrarian view, especially in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley. I think oftentimes it might have been seen as not as positive, like that,
Mm-hmm.
questioning what kind of deal flow is outside of Silicon Valley. Are these companies any good? How can they raise downstream capital? But regardless, we made that early bet. And now, 10 years later, we've seen just how quickly these ecosystems have developed. Like Brazil is such a great example of just how quickly it's matured, and such strong talent, and great companies that have been coming out, great unicorns, and many in our portfolio of Brazilian companies. So making that bet early, I think, has really stayed with us. Now we still have to push ourselves, because now everybody is being global is now is kind of table stakes. So there's of course a lot of global firms, a lot of local firms in these regions building up, but definitely being global, active, early stage, and diverse is a big part of I think, what people know 500's brand for.
Definitely. And what did you say that 500 Startups has to offer to founders, and why do these global distributed companies or founders everywhere are interested in joining your firm?
It definitely is a great, we can be a great partner and investor for companies who have that global mindset from day one. So even if you're based in a certain market or city, and maybe you're still targeting the local market, oftentimes founders have ambitions to be global at some point, or figure out how to reach other audiences, because the world now, maybe not so much 10 years ago or 20 years ago, like back in the, say, early days of when I was at Google, it's such a different landscape. We're so much more connected, and globalization is so much more than it ever was before. So to that end, companies need to learn how to work and operate in a global economy. So for founders, that's really what they look to us for. That we are very global. We have connections in almost, our portfolio spans more than 75 countries around the world, and we have people on the ground in many countries around the world. And that kind of connections, that network is really critical for these companies. Another thing is really around the expertise that we have on how to grow your company. Early days, we used to really actually lean on this brand a lot in terms of helping companies with distribution and growth, or growth hacking, marketing, really just like getting customers and making money. That's still very much core to what we help companies with, especially in our accelerator program. So we really try to help them understand how to acquire customers, because there's not really very, very few companies, probably no companies, that can just have users come to them. They have to work at it. And sometimes they don't understand what channels work. How am I going to do this in a cost effective way? All of those things, that can take your company from 0 to 100 to 1,000. That's something where our team and our mentors and our portfolio can really help our companies.
Definitely, I can definitely vouch for that. That was one of the first reasons that attracted us, and at the same time, my best memories during the acceleration program are around talking to our POC, our point of contact, and developing strategies for distribution. So definitely. Right. And Christine, what do you say that now in 2020 are those strong suits being a company or a firm that helps with global distribution and that goes deeper into helping companies, helping startups grow and get traction, early traction? Do you think this is also something that keeps being important to these startups that go to the acceleration program, or even this, when they want a deal from the VC firm later on? Is that something that you still see yourself and your partners doing to this day?
In terms of helping companies on growth, is that what you mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this distribution, this distribution help and structure that you were so famous for a couple of years ago. I think that's something that keeps being important, right?
Yeah, I think those fundamentals are really critical, because I think one of the things that we do try to be careful about is not just unsustainable growth, just for the sake of it, but growth to grow the business, because that is a good thing. But what really works for the company. So, like, let's say you have a very flawed business model, then we would not necessarily say, oh, that's fine, just figure it out later. Like, we are, like, from the batch and just our experience with all these companies, that's something that companies really need to test and understand before they add the fuel to grow. So that might be something that's different from maybe other advice out there. Like, we really want to focus on the unit economics, revenue model. And I think that has come to be, that has come to help a lot in all kinds of times, especially now where the economy is the way it is, and companies that don't have those strong fundamentals are struggling. But time and time again, we come back to those types of very basic things about how to make sure you don't run out of money, making sure you're acquiring customers, you understand your customers. So I think those have been pretty consistent. I think even from when Content Tools was in the batch many years ago, that some of those fundamentals are just, they don't change. Of course, the tactics and techniques and maybe tools all evolve. I think the tools that I used for email marketing, like 15 years ago, it's not relevant anymore, of course, but at least, understanding what causes, users to open emails, like convert, all those things are like pretty fundamental.
Exactly. How to structure your channels. Maybe now you have more of a product-led growth approach compared to 5 years ago. But anyways, the fundamentals, they don't go anywhere, I agree. And at the same time, what are the type of founders, or let's start with the founders and then grow to the startup. But what types of founders are you looking for the acceleration program, and also to invest?
So for the companies that we look for, and we invest in all the companies that go through the accelerator, so they kind of go together. But definitely when we're looking at a company, first and foremost is the team. We're typically very early investors. Sometimes we are the first investment into a company. Sometimes we're investing alongside others, but we're generally kind of at that seed stage. And we work with companies when they have a product. They might have some customers, depending on the industry. It could, maybe they're still in beta, or, they haven't launched. Maybe they've launched and are still learning. But regardless, it's so early that you can't really go off of, like too much on like financials, because there's not much there at that point. So it really comes down to the team. So we'd like to see that the team, works well together. They have something that maybe we see as kind of an unfair advantage to why they're going to win, and why they're uniquely situated to build a great product. They really understand their customers. And I guess a couple other things that are more about the founders themselves. Sometimes it's hard to get this just from, a 30-minute call or 1-hour call, but the advantage we have in meeting these companies is that we do get to work with them for a couple months. And what we see is that founders who can be more coachable, like they listen to customers, they listen to investors, they really take the feedback in, they do tend to fare better. It doesn't mean that they're going to be successful guaranteed, but it makes sense, right? Like if you,
Yeah.
you have to listen to what customers want. People, you have to hire a good team, and it doesn't mean that you listen to everybody, of course, but that you take that feedback in and execute. And then I think the second point
Definitely.
is around the execution. That when you're an early stage company, the odds are always against you. You don't have enough money, time. So the more nimble you can be and execute quickly, you say you're going to do something, you test it, and you go. Those who can really optimize for speed and execution, that's also a good quality.
Definitely. I think it's an early leadership, or I mean, it's a leadership best practice. And
Yeah.
if a founder is showing that early on, it means they will have more odds for them later. And how about the structure or the size of the businesses that you look, or maybe is that anything around like this is too early, or you shouldn't apply if you haven't done this or that? Is there like a major thesis around either business model or early traction, anything like that?
I would say that what I can say for sure is that for companies who don't even have maybe they don't have a product yet, or they're just at a napkin stage, or just idea stage, that's probably a bit early for us. So we like to work with companies that have some kind of working prototype or working product. But once they do, then I think it really it can really depend on the sector, the team. I would say that companies who are curious about applying, they wonder if they're too early or too late. I would definitely say you should still apply, because we've worked with companies at very, very early stages, across a lot of different sectors. And then we've worked with companies who have, a couple million ARR. They've been bootstrapped. Maybe they've already raised money. It really comes down to like what the company needs. And a lot of them maybe are looking to get that help with growth and marketing. Maybe they want to get access to a global network. But I would say no hesitation on if you wonder if you're too early, I would say just apply. And our team would be eager to meet some great people.
Definitely, and even for the sake of feedback, that's always helpful.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
yeah, and at the same time, what do you expect from these founders after they're in? So they apply, they are in, either you invested in them, or they are in for both investment and the acceleration program. What do you expect from them, being from Brazil or elsewhere?
Oh, I think so. It's interesting because I think a lot of investors and programs, they work differently. So I think we like to be somewhere kind of in the middle in terms of being, one end of the spectrum is being very, very hands-on, and the other end is being very hands-off. So I think I like to think 500 is somewhere in the middle, where, especially in the accelerator, we do work with the companies every week. We try to be very helpful in terms of having a weekly sync. The batch companies meet together. We offer talks, and we have demo day. But ultimately, we respect that it's the founder's company. We are investors. We're just along for the ride. So ultimately, companies may just go in a different direction. They don't have to listen to everything we say, of course. But I think that for founders, the more that they can get out of the program while they're in the program, the better. So at least meeting with our team, taking advantage of the resources that we have. Otherwise, I mean, I don't think there's too many expectations in terms of that we expect that they show up to every talk or anything like that, or we expect that they have to double their growth by the end of the batch, because it really depends on the company. And as we've seen, all kinds of things can happen. Like COVID can happen. A lot of times there may be issues with, sometimes founders have issues with each other, and that takes a big toll on just the company progress. Or things, as normal course of business, they're working with a customer falls out at the last minute. So I think we don't necessarily have really strong expectations that you must hit this milestone. But oftentimes what we do is we like to work with the companies to set some kind of milestones that, by the end of the batch, maybe they'll have doubled something because the company is part of the company's own roadmap, or they'll have released a feature. They'll have finally recruited like a CTO or whatever it is. So that's, I think, the more that we can see in terms of the company wanting to set a roadmap and move quickly, then we'd like to be helpful there.
One of the main goals for many companies joining an acceleration program is to receive any round of investment after that. So you have demo day, you meet so many investors. So how do you deal with that expectation, and how many of these companies actually get that check afterwards?
That's definitely an expectation for founders. Like a lot of times they'll go through an accelerator, definitely to get that help, but also to help them raise money either through the network or getting exposure, sometimes getting the validation that they are a 500 company and whatnot. So I think in terms of expectations for companies, I guess it all goes back to like what makes sense for the company. So we definitely don't like to pressure companies that they need to raise money if they don't feel that it's the right time. But ultimately, if a company, knows what they're going to do with the fundraise, they know why they're raising. First of all, they're not just trying to raise $1 million because they feel like they have to, but that they know, let's say I raise a seed round of 1 or 2 million, that gets me to these milestones. They know how they're going to use the proceeds. Then that's a good sign. And then, we would want to help the companies at least get exposure to investors that might be interested. So we try to do this through having VCs and angels and family offices meet our companies and getting them into maybe press, demo days. So at least they get visibility, especially when they're in the accelerator. And in terms of like the success rate, I think it definitely depends on, of course, the company's goals, where they're coming from. Generally, we have seen that maybe 20, 30% of the companies go on to raise a more substantial round. But sometimes, some of them are late bloomers, like they may not need to raise money after the batch, or they decide not to. And certainly during this time, a lot of companies have been holding off because of the circumstances with COVID and fundraising. But, some of them may go on to raise later, a year later or whatnot. So it kind of really, it's what works for the company.
Yeah, and you mentioned COVID. How is 500 right now helping the companies from the portfolio and the companies that are maybe reaching out to join a future acceleration program, a future batch? How are you now approaching them and helping them currently with everything that is going on?
Yeah, it's been such a very unprecedented time, especially that this does not just impact one region or certain group of people. It's everywhere. it's unprecedented, and it's happening to everybody, impacting every single person. So, in some sense, there's there's that makes it very different from any other, I think, like crisis or recession in previous decades. But and in terms of the ways that we've been trying to help our companies, I think a lot of it is being able to have resources available for companies to feel like they can, talk with each other or meet others to get advice. And a lot of that is in our virtual online community, which we've actually always had for we've had that for even pre-COVID. Especially because we have such a global network that people can't meet in person. But I think now that we are fully remote and our office is not open, and we're doing, even our accelerator has gone to virtual first for the foreseeable future, we have now put a lot of energy into really increasing that online experience with our companies through like webinars, office hours, inviting as much of our portfolio companies to come join the Slack community that we have, offering resources. So those things can definitely help in terms of at least providing what the companies need. It is definitely it's definitely a big challenge for founders, because there's been so much of a spread of companies that are really struggling, and it's had a huge impact on their companies. It's tough to see, all the way to companies that are actually doing really well. Like COVID has accelerated their industry. And then there's a lot in the middle that are kind of, they're kind of waiting and seeing and and taking precautionary measures. I mean, we definitely have recommended companies be as conservative as possible in terms of cash. So that's a big thing. So it's definitely like, I feel like we're all navigating this together in some ways. So I mean, hoping for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I mean, being cautious with cash is number one, but at the same time, taking the opportunity, especially if you're early stage, taking the opportunity to learn from the market, or maybe even create new lines of revenue, or maybe take a new way of offering your product, or changing a little bit the market. Have you seen these types of movements?
Yeah, that's definitely, there's a number of examples that I think we've seen with even in our own portfolio, but all around, where companies have done exactly what you mentioned, that they've taken this time to see it as a way to reinvent their business or find new opportunities, largely because there's urgency, like they have to, or they feel that they're starting to see a lot more demand for maybe a certain area that they hadn't expected. So sometimes, what is the expression? I think innovation is kind of born out of a necessity or hard times, but we've definitely seen that a lot, and I think it is good advice that certainly being prudent, conserve cash, cut costs, but also don't lose sight of the long term in terms of like innovation.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I think one of the things that startups can do best is move fast.
Yes,
and faster than the dinosaurs out there. So we should definitely take that advantage.
Definitely. It's a huge advantage, like small, like startups have. They can be nimble. Like if you're a huge corporation, it's so hard to do that. So it's a very, very important reminder.
Yeah. Awesome. And I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into another topic we mentioned earlier, the Brazilian startup ecosystem. It is so different than other places. I mean, every ecosystem is different in a way, but in Brazil, we have different cities. It's distributed. How do you see, Christine, this ecosystem in Brazil evolving throughout the past 10 years?
Well, we started investing in Brazil pretty early on. So, back in the early days of 500, when people were still scratching their head as to, why are you investing in companies outside of the US? One of them was Brazil. Yeah. So, our first investment into a Brazilian company was Viva Real back in 2011. But since then, over the 10 years, we've invested in more than 40 Brazilian startups, number of sectors, fintech, health tech, fintech, health tech, education, SaaS companies. It's been we've seen a lot of just great talent out of Brazil. It's just a great source of innovation. And then in terms of specific sectors, there's a lot that we've seen from both startups and just kind of the overall landscape in things like agri-tech or food. Fintech has been quite hot, especially recently. So, we have, wonderful, amazing team members there, including Beji Yang, who's, one of our managing partners and part of the executive team at 500, who's been with 500 for, I think like maybe 8 years. So since very early days. And so I'm very fortunate to call her a partner. And then we recently brought on Flavio Diaz as one of our partners based in Sao Paulo. As well as a wonderful person named Itali, who's also based in Brazil. So we've been investing there since 2011. We're going to continue to invest more in the market and find great companies. But I'm excited. It's definitely evolved a lot in terms of just capital coming into the market. I think the talent has always been consistently strong, if not more. But now the gap in terms of capital mentorship is hopefully starting to close, at least for startups.
Awesome. And for Brazilian founders that are interested in getting into knowing more about 500 startups, or maybe being part of the program or receiving investments from you guys, what is the best path, would you say? I know that you have a lot of outbound as well as inbound leads. And what is the best path to get to you?
Oh, I think like Flavio and Italy probably won't like it. I was going to jokingly say, reach out to them, like show up at their door and no. But I mean, one
Not
of the
right
good
now, at
things is,
least.
yeah, maybe not now,
Yeah.
but I think that there's of course like the network introduction. So we have, founders in Brazil that we've gotten great references from for new companies. But of course, that only goes so far because we might have some great founders who don't know any of them. So that's why we have we have an application process. We actually do look at all the applications. So I think that's definitely one, and we do invest in companies that we've never met, and they're cold applications. I do think that in the nature of hustling and founders kind of finding avenues in. I think that because we do have a good portfolio and a team in Brazil, there are ways, especially virtually, that there ways to connect with our team and these founders as a way to at least get to know 500, and even for yourselves as a founder, understand if it's right for you, if it's something that makes sense for your company. And I've generally found that our founders are very willing to help other founders.
Yeah, definitely. In VC, and we learned so much that around the power of intro too, right? So getting an intro either through someone from the portfolio, or founder from the portfolio, or even another connection, a mentor, or someone would definitely be a way in. And these people, they are definitely, they understand if that's the moment for your company or not. They will want to make sure that their own intro won't be wasted.
Yeah, there's like a the social capital. They want to make a good intro. That's true.
Yeah, definitely. So I think for us that worked. I remember we applied, and then we wanted to have multiple intros. We want that interview.
Exactly.
It all goes to the interview, right? So the intro doesn't mean that you're in. It only means that you get the interview, and that's the first step. That's your foot on the door.
That's true. Yeah.
And do you have any other suggestions, Christine, for Brazilian founders, either if they have local operations or global operations? How should they approach those with these different point of views? I see many Brazilian founders asking themselves if they should go global. That's a huge question here, because Brazil is a huge market. But at the same time, one thing that I like to say is that if your product it can be used by people or companies elsewhere, if it is agnostic in terms of the culture or the market, why not, right? Why to cap your growth or your possibilities? That's a huge question for us. We went global from day one, but many companies don't do that. They want to settle in one market and then expand. So how do you think about that? How do you approach these founders and these questions?
It's definitely a very top of mind question for founders in Brazil and founders in a lot of markets where it's a large enough market that you could stay in the market or you could expand. Of course, if you're in a very small country, then there's no choice. You have to go global because your home market's not big enough. But for Brazil, I think just like you said, there are a number of companies. Brazil's a huge market. So there's so many number of companies that have stayed local to Brazil in terms of their customers, but they are, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, unicorns. So it's proof that you can build a very big business just targeting Brazil. But it really, I think, like you said, if the product is something that can be, it's agnostic to geography or country, then there's an opportunity to expand beyond Brazil. So, like your company Contental is a great example that it's a global, can be global. One of our other accelerator companies named Pipefy is not, they're based in Brazil, but it's not unique to just, Brazilian companies. So that's another example. But we do have, investments like Olist, Conta Azul, Descomplica that are very much targeting Brazil. yet they're doing very well. So I think it really comes down to like what makes sense for your business, of course. And no matter what, if you're Brazil trying to go to the US or trying to expand to the rest of Latin America, or you're a Malaysian company trying to expand to other parts of Asia, all of those things are there. There's very similar challenges in understanding what it means to internationalize, expand. And so I think it's definitely, a plug, of course, for 500, we love to help companies with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christine. That was our time for this talk. It was so enjoyable. I really like talking to you, and the 500 team is amazing. So definitely, if you're interested in getting into 500 startups, you can, you have your path. You just heard everything that you need. And Christine, thanks so much for joining us here. And yeah, have a great time with your kids. I know that you're working from home. It's such a challenging time for everybody, and you took this huge chunk of your time to be here with us. So thank you very much.
No, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation, and thanks to everyone for tuning in, and hope we get to meet some great founders from Brazil, and that continues. But thank you.
I'm sure you will. Thank you so much. Bye, you guys. Enjoy the rest of our... Aproveitem o restante do Case Startup Summit, que está muito legal. Esse é só o primeiro dia. Até mais.